So today I have with me Michael C. Anderson. You are an author of a few books, and you've got a new book just launched called America's Counterfeit Democracy. I'm very interested in the things you got going on and the things that you research and write about. So can you tell us a little bit about your books?
Yeah, published my first book in 2017 called The Progressive Gene. And then I published basically one book every year since then. It's a continuing process. I'm working on my sixth book now. I just started it. Now it's the fifth book launched. But I got started with this particular subject matter because I've been interested in history and I've written about history. I have a blog on ancient civilizations that I started in 2008 and it's still going. But I was always interested in why the left and right don't get along and disagree all the time. And then I read a book called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if you've heard of it. He's a social psychologist at NYU. And basically, in that book, he described for the first time academically the reasons why the left and right are different. And the reasons are genetic. They're not, behavioral or opinion. They're genetic. So, um, I wrote my first book was called The Progressive Gene. It was about why the left behaves like they do. And then I thought I'll write a book about the right called The Conservative Gene, but I got interrupted by all the tribal stuff. So I wrote a book called Tribalism in 2019, went back to The Conservative Gene in 2021. And in 2023, I published a book called Twilight of the American Experiment.
Yeah.
Without moral balance, our republic will fall. And that's basically about um, the dominance of the left over the media, over academia, the traditional media and social media, and how they have more influence than the right. And there needs to be more of a balance because all everyone hears is the opinions of the left and their ideology, and that's dangerous. That's the first four books, and again, the kind of the theme among all the books is the fact that, and we could discuss this if you want. The difference between right and left are behavioral adaptations that occurred back before Homo sapiens even existed, in the primitive hominids, and they're basically adaptations to allow mankind, hominids, to adapt to different environments because hominids began in Africa and then they migrated out. And when they migrated out, they encountered different ecosystems, cold for the first time, not just warm weather. So they had to adapt. And basically, the conservative liberal dichotomy is liberals like change and conservatives don't. Conservatives like the status quo. So, in a tribe of 100 to 150 people, those who like change became the hunters and would search for food when food was in short supply. Whereas the conservatives, who are more interested in the status quo but also more conscientious, became the food managers when food was in large quantities. So those adaptations allowed humans to adapt to different environments and prolong their likelihood of their survival. So those basic differences, along with other personality characteristics, have been carried forward until this time and really didn't mean much until politics started uh, in the early 1800s because up to that point, after government started, when agriculture began and governments began, conservatives pretty much ruled all civilizations between then and the Enlightenment because people had no rights. So there was no way for people who believed in equality, like the left does, to exercise that in a society. The monarchs and the despots and the tyrants and all that were all conservative because they were conservative, conserving their wealth and their power, basically. But then the Enlightenment changed that because the Enlightenment opened up the rights of the individual versus the rights of the group. And once individuals got rights, they demanded the government do more for them. And that created the existence of political parties and elected officials to represent various groups um, in society. So the progressives, the people on the left have been very active ever since, obviously. They were primarily responsible for the progressive era starting in 1880 to, let's say, 1920, which had an enormous positive impact on society because they fought for less corruption and more equity among workers, limiting the number of hours you work per week, preventing child labor, and giving women rights, et cetera, et cetera. So, but the balance over, let's say, the past 40, 60 years since the 60s has gradually moved to the left. And now we're out of balance and we need to fix it. And we're very tribal. And the tribalism that exists is basically controlled by small parts of each side at the extremes. And so there's like 12% of the population that carry the narrative about which ideology is the best. And the other 88% of us have to sit there and watch it and watch government be, uh, what's the term I want to use? Not corrupted, but ossified and not make any progress because no one can come to an agreement. So, without fixing tribalism, we can't fix the problems with the government because we're not united. We have no consensus. We're just fighting amongst ourselves. And the billionaires sit and laugh because we're wasting our time while they make money.
Yeah, they don't
Um,
really care who wins as long as we
no,
lose.
they don't care. In fact, they don't. I mean, I made a comment on Twitter yesterday. They don't even care who the candidates are. I mean, they want a candidate that each party wants a candidate that follows their ideology, but they don't really care who it is because they control them anyway.
Right.
Anyway, so the fifth book comes along because I decided to move forward from the tribalism thing and focus on the real evil, which is the billionaires. The billionaires basically wealthy people have controlled human society since the advent of government. Because as soon as people got land, they got power from that land and they became wealthy and they use that wealth to control their government and the public. So the problem we have today is that the billionaires are in are partnered with the owners or managers of major corporations, and they control the propaganda we hear. They control the media. There's seven big media companies, all corporate owned, all partly controlled by billionaires, and so they exert power over the rest of us to influence. They basically have two goals. One is to increase their wealth, and second is to live in a stable society where their wealth is not threatened. So they spend a lot of time on those two things, and they're really only interested in their own goals, not the goals of the public.
So on in your first book, The Progressive Gene. So I kind of wanted to dive a little bit into the what that because so you said that the way we believe politically is genetic. And
Partly, well, let me
par-
qualify that because I mean, when psychologists look at this issue, and I'm sure you've heard the um, nature nurture narrative many times.
that's where I was going with that is
Right,
because
right,
we are products of our environment, if you will.
right. So um, I don't think we can say that the genetic influence on personality, namely political morality, is more than 50%. It's half. And I think the consensus among psychologists is that it's pretty much half born personality and half acquired personality through life. So I don't think there's any disputes there. Um, if you I happen to be a DNA conservative. I know that about myself, but that doesn't make me a Republican. But if your parents are conservative and you grow up in a conservative neighborhood and you have conservative friends who go to conservative church, you're going to increase the likelihood of you being conservative. Um, Obviously, if you have parents that are one's a conservative and one's a liberal, then that changes the odds. Um, I've seen data that suggests that it's about 60% of the adults have the political morality of their parents. It's obviously not 100. I've been at a couple of podcasts where people, the host wondered about that. Are you saying that, it no one can change? And no, I'm not saying that. I mean, there are even conservatives, well, people with two conservative parents that end up being liberal because the influence of the environment is not zero. Obviously, it's up to 50%. Um, it's interesting when kids go to college, everybody becomes liberal in college because you're breaking away from your parents and you have new ideas and you're influenced more by your friends and all that. But then most conservatives snap back to conservatism once they graduate because their influences that were in them before they went to college are still there and they override whatever experience they have in college. And again, this is not all. But yes, it's nature and nurture in different degrees, and but it's there.
So my parents both were pretty progressive. As a matter of fact, my dad, his parents were also like heavily influenced on the Democratic side. And so I don't really know where I fit in politically because I didn't spend a whole lot of time with either of my parents growing up. And so the way I kind of believe politically is it's very weird and nuanced because I'm very aware of the tribalism. I'm very aware of the nonsense in media. I'm very aware of all the things going on the right, and I take all of those things and I formulate opinion, or I try to formulate opinion on my own, independently of those thoughts. But if I had to guess where I would land politically as the way I vote would be, I lean probably more left than right, but I'm the I don't know if you've noticed, but in the last 10, 15 years or so, the left has moved progressively to the left and the right has moved progressively to the right. I just don't know where I fit in
Yeah.
anymore.
I think your parents are probably Republicans now. I mean, compared to if they're progressive in 1980 or something, I mean, I think Bill Clinton's a Republican now, for example,
Right.
because the left has moved so far to the left. Um, Jon Jonathan Haidt maintains a website that has various psychological tests on it. And I'll give you the instructions after we're done or something. We'll exchange emails and you can take a test there and the results will tell you which you are. So
Okay.
you'll clear that up. Um, the website is yourmorals.org. But again, I'll give you instructions on how to go there. And basically, and we can shorten this up very quickly by my asking you the question about your views toward equality, because the left is very attuned to equality and feels, in general, they don't like capitalism and because they feel it's unfair. It disadvantages people, and people who are not able to achieve success on their own are left out in the cold by capitalism. But there's a whole spectrum of views on the left. There are conservative Democrats. There are welfare state Democrats that are um, successors to people that grew up during the Depression, and they believe basically in big government because they believe government has a role to take care of people who can't take care of themselves. But then it gets more and more ideological because then the second group that's on the left is the identity politics people. And then you get over to the socialists, the Marxists, and the communists who are on the extreme left because they want to replace our political system with theirs. So, and it's interesting because um, I read a book by a communist, Freddie DeBoer, and he's an interesting writer. He's a he has a PhD in English from Purdue University, but he's more of a he's more of a literary guy, but he's a communist. And in his book that I read, and I can give you the title if you're interested, he talks about the battle between the socialists and the identity politics people. They have very different uh, objectives, and they are not aligned at all. Basically, the communists look at I mean, if you don't mind me getting this detail, but the
No, go
communists look
ahead.
at the identity politics people as misguided because if you want to fix a political system, you got to replace it, and they should be aligned with the communists, work together because they would have more leverage if they were a larger group. But the politics people don't trust the communists because communist ideology is based on class. You know, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. And the identity politics people don't believe in class. They believe that class is a mischaracterization of people of identity. So they go their separate ways. And so the left is a very interesting large tent with a lot of different points of view. But in general, people on the left believe strongly in equality. And if you look at, Jonathan Haidt's um, testing, I've taken the test myself. The, I'll quickly give you the answer here. People on the left are very focused on equality and somewhat focused on fairness. They're high on fairness, but not as high as they are in equality. People on the right are interested in authority, loyalty, and sanctity, which is sanctity is, veneration of traditions and things like that. People on the right are very loyal. They tend to be patriotic. They respect authority. They believe that it's impossible to have a socialist society, that the natural human society organization is a meritocracy because some people are better than or more talented than others. So people and conservatives tend to respect hierarchy as the way things should be or have to be. So again, your feelings about equality and how far you think society needs to go to reach your equality standard will usually determine where you are on the left spectrum.
So,
Again, the ones on the most extreme left are the ones that feel like you have to take the most extreme measures to get there.
so where I fit in, kind of like in that set of thinking, I think I would go more right because I do believe in a hierarchy. I do believe in meritocracy. I do believe there's probably a good fit for everybody. But where I get lost is because so I love capitalism. I
Mhm.
love capitalism. I'm part of that is because I'm a consumer, and I believe part of that is also my age. But I believe in like a morality with capitalism, and I don't. I think if the, I think if you have to interject yourself to make sure things are fair, then it, that's not really a fair thing to do either. You know, if we have government coming in and regulating who we hire, how we hire, stuff like that, I don't think that's very fair.
Right. I agree.
I think with what when I turn in a job application and it asks what my qualifications are, it doesn't ask. really what my skills are on most job applications. It just asks where I've worked last, and what my education level is. And I don't think in most of the jobs around here, it doesn't matter what your education level is. It's all about skill.
Mhm.
And I've I've struggled with that for a number of years because I don't really in that sense I really kind of just believe that if the, it's weird because there's good and there's evil, there's good, there's bad, but there's no in between. That's kind of where I like to sit, is that in between space. And
Right.
I understand the necessary evils or the necessary bad things, and I understand some of the things that the left brings, but I don't know. It's strange. It's very strange to think about because tribalism and so I don't really didn't never really thought about the progressive gene and the conservative gene. Never really thought too much about that where because I didn't spend much time with my parents. Um, and I knew I picked up some things genetically from them. I never really thought about politics being one of those things.
Right.
But the tribalism and stuff like that, I do understand that stuff. And you were in America's counterfeit democracy, talking about billionaires and stuff. They contribute to the tribalism that you see, like Apple versus Samsung, those type of things.
Yeah.
Um, and Tesla's a good one because like Tesla's quality is not even very good, but
Hmm.
people will they'll shell out $100,000 for a vehicle that's substandard just for the name.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of tribalism there. But I do understand those things. And when I think about life in general, I try to I understand that local politics affects quite a bit more than what people think. If if we really understood how little the federal politics matter in our daily lives, I think people might feel a little differently about the presidential candidates currently. I think if people understood that they need to start locally and work their way out, these are the people that represent us. And if we don't have the representation that we want, we need to vote in the people that give us the best chance, that are thinking the way we think and that feel the way we feel. And the status quo, I think the status quo hasn't been the same in the last 20, 25 years or so. It's just changed with the political candidates.
Yep. Well, I mean, conservatives understand that the status quo is not possible. I'm saying they're comfortable with the status quo. They understand that there's a natural change in society over time. There's a generational change. Each generation thinks differently than the prior generation. What they don't like is changing too fast. And the left always wants to change faster than the right thinks is appropriate. So, I mean, in our society, and I won't speak for the others, although I think they're similar, the the right acts as a brake on the left's excesses. That's the way I look at it. And that's not to say all the left is does is wrong and all the right does is right. It's just that I'm back to the consensus thing. Unless we have a consensus that plots a path based on the input from both sides, it's a problem. I mean, I use the example in my book. If we go back to the prehistoric days, like I'm saying, where these behavioral traits developed, if the tribe had only liberals in it, they'd all be killed because they would go hunting all the time and wouldn't be careful and they'd be dead. That'd be the end of your tribe. If they were all conservatives, they would never go hunting because it was a violation of the status quo and they'd all starve to death. So that's the point of the consensus thing because you have, and it's political morality we're talking about. It's about how each side views the way government ought to function. And there's no right answer to that. And, you know, one of the things I was thinking about when I wrote the first book was people on one side or the other are always accusing the other side of being wrong. Well, there is no wrong. There's two points of view. And you should learn from the fact that there are two points of view that you're better off producing a consensus between both sides to move forward than trying to move forward on your own while you ridicule the other side. It just doesn't work.
So, do you see the United States heading in a good direction? If let's just say Donald Trump gets elected, do you see things changing in a good direction or
Well,
negative?
I that's interesting. I don't like Trump, um, but I look at this um, election as a chance to slow down the left because the left is, I mean,
That's a good way to
Trump,
put
Trump
it because I don't like Trump either, but I think he is his policies are far enough right to counterbalance the extreme left that we've had for the last 4 years, in my
let me give you a
opinion.
little bigger picture aspect to this. You know what neoliberalism is?
Yeah.
Okay. So neoliberalism started in the late 60s. It was initially started by a Democrat, but then it sort of became a Republican mantra. But and Carter actually did some neoliberal stuff. Jimmy Carter did, but uh, Clinton and Obama were big neoliberalists because the Democratic Party has gradually bought into it. And basically, just to review for the audience, neoliberalism is the dedication of a society to capitalism as its primary operational principle, meaning everything in this, every organization in the society should have a capitalist point of view. You know, hotels, universities, everything. But the danger there is that if it's unchecked, um,
You end
then
up
it,
with a pay to play system.
yeah, you end up with a pay to play system. So, um, and the logical extension of the neoliberal obsession is the World Economic Forum. And I don't know how much you read about that, but they have this plan 2030, which is instituting basically a totalitarian government around the world. So that's the logical path that has to be slowed down. Now, Trump is an anomaly, pretty much of an anomaly in history, because, uh, and you probably understand this, populists show up when government's ineffective, just like third parties show up when government's ineffective, because that's the public crying out for something different. And when Silicon Valley took off in the early 2000s, they and the billionaires created there who have very liberal views, they were absorbed into the Democratic ideology and they started to move the Democratic Party to the left. Well, the group abandoned by the Democrats when they embraced Silicon Valley was the MAGA people, basically middle income and lower middle income white men. So they were left with no representation, seeking a populist, and then Trump came down the escalator. So that's where the MAGA people were born. But the billionaires, obviously, you know as well as I do, how many attempts there have been to prevent Trump from succeeding. All the stuff, deep state stuff, the first his first term, impeaching him twice for reasons that shouldn't have been used. All the trials between 2020 and now, most of which are of all of which are fake, just to stop him. Because
Yeah,
to the
and it's all
billionaire,
it's doing is fueling it. And I see
yeah,
Donald Trump as uh so as an American citizen, we've got these attitudes, right? And I think Donald Trump encompasses how a lot of us have felt over the last few years. And like you
yeah,
said, there's a lot of people out there without representation. And I think a
yep,
lot of people feel left that their government doesn't care about them, which I mean, arguably they shouldn't care about us, but that's a different conversation for a different time. But I think a lot of people see Donald Trump as a change to that status quo.
Yep.
And I think what his intention was when he ran for president was to ruffle feathers and
Yep.
to not necessarily point out the obvious, but make the obvious even more obvious. And there's been so many ridiculous things, especially in the news cycle in the last 6 months. So many ridiculous things that have happened, and so many people on the left trying to gaslight everybody in America
Yeah.
into believing that there's nothing wrong with President Biden.
Yep.
And I just when I see things like that, it makes me like, why are you doing this? Why are you lying to my face like I don't have eyes?
Yep.
And I do understand like Trump does it too, and the right does the things, but it's not quite so obvious on
Right.
their side.
Right.
And I think Trump does it on purpose to to rile up the MAGAs, the MAGA
Yep.
population, and get them rallied up onto his side. I think that's why he does some of the things that he does, for psychological purposes to win. But it's blatantly obvious, like the when Trump started bringing out his policies, when everybody was questioning whether Harris had policies. Uh, Harris came out and doubled the child tax credit that Trump was talking about, and when he started talking about a uh, fixing the grocery store prices, that's when Kamala came out and said, we're going to do price control, and those
And
things
no
have never
tax on
worked.
tips. He brought
Yeah,
that
no
up.
tax
She
on.
brought it
That's
up
a good one.
2 days later or something.
That was the first one that
Yeah.
actually that I saw was the tax on no tax on tips. I just and I don't see a big split between the public. I think there is two different publics. There's social media public and there's public. When I
Yep.
go outside, I don't see a whole lot of division. I
No.
do see, like MAGA Republicans and the ultra left. I do see that, but they're nice to each other. I don't see a whole lot of fighting and arguing. And um I was talking to somebody from California that they said that they see it all the time out there, but I don't see a whole lot of division here. And I'm near Kansas City. I used to travel quite a bit before inflation, took my legs out from underneath me. But uh, when I traveled, I didn't see a whole lot of division either. But when I look on the internet, that's all I see is division. Do you think some of that's manufactured?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, this is back to my 12% of the population is carrying the ideological argument between the two sides, and the rest of the American people don't feel that way. Um, and this is the Joseph Goebbels thing, a propaganda minister for the Nazis. If you tell a lie enough times, people will believe it. And
Yeah.
the and again, we come back to the personality differences between the two groups, and I'll give you a little more context there. The left is very united. Uh, they don't take any prisoners, and they'll do anything to win. And if you're in the left and you cross them, you're out. So nobody, I mean, like Nancy Pelosi, when she was the speaker, she held that group together tight. You couldn't get a peep out of anybody who disagreed with the ideology. Conservatives are individualists, and uh, they really, I mean, to be honest, they don't have an ideology. Their ideology is conservatism. It's traditions and the status quo, which isn't an ideology, that's a behavior. They don't like combat. They're them fighting the Democrats is like taking a knife to a gunfight. They do not have that. Well, it's not that they don't have the aptitude or the motivation, they don't have the desire. They Most conservatives would just like to live their lives, leave me alone, government, stay away, and I'll be fine. I'll figure it out. So the battle, and that's part of the reason why the left has taken over the media, because it was ceded to it by the right. The right was beaten up and intimidated, like in the university professorships, and all the conservative professors went to think tanks. And so now
It,
90% of the professors are lefties. So,
isn't that crazy how you do see that quite a bit more of aggressiveness on the left.
yeah,
Just sometimes it's malicious. And like for instance, what they did to Biden
yeah,
with the presidency. It is insane to see some of that stuff because we see it, we point it out, but we're silenced because the media is being controlled by the left.
yeah,
And that's why a lot of like I see a lot of podcasts are becoming popular now because they are allowed to talk about whatever they want to talk about. Now, there is some censorship going on in the last few years, but it's you kind of with that stuff you kind of have to have a happy medium because as things get more advanced, as podcasting and YouTube itself, as that stuff grows, it's you can't let everything out there in the ether, but you can't control everything either. You can't censor everybody. And the I'm of the opinion the best way to combat a bad idea is good ideas. And you had mentioned Joseph Goebbels and propaganda. I was kind of trying to describe to my wife a few months ago that the left reminds me more of fascists from the 1930s than they do the Democratic Party.
right. Well, let me elaborate on that for a minute because I don't know if you've thought of it this way, but this is always expressed on Twitter. And when I have the energy, I correct the people that express it this way. They call Trump a fascist and they call right wing conservatives fascists, which is an inappropriate applying of the term. And let me tell you why. So everybody understands the political spectrum. Democrats are on the left, Republicans are on the right, and independents in the middle. That is a political spectrum. It's not an ideological spectrum. If you look at the ideological spectrum, you have communist socialists on the left, fascists on the right, and conservatives are in the middle because both the left and right groups are group ideologies are group oriented. Communists are group oriented in using class to represent the need for a revolution. The fascists are group oriented because it involves an authoritarian system where the entire society is controlled by one or more people. I have a cat too. So I love cats. So
This
you
is my
get that.
buddy.
So, and basically, Rousseau was the first one who introduced the concept of group based politics because it was the Enlightenment was beginning and he objected to individual rights because he didn't think that made sense, that individuals didn't deserve to have rights on their own, that government should be focused toward group rights. And there was a split then in the 19th century when, because socialism got going, Marx and all that stuff, but then there was a formation of a group of right wing group ideology. You call it collectivism. I don't know if you've heard that term, but
Yeah.
both fascism and socialism are collectivist ideologies because they're based on group. So conservatives are in the ideology spectrum. Conservatives are in the middle because they're individualists. They believe in a society that's run for the purpose of rights of individuals and not groups. So you can see why calling conservatives fascists doesn't
It
apply.
doesn't fit.
Right, doesn't fit.
It yeah, this came to my mind a couple weeks ago, and I was having a conversation with someone who was telling, describing to me that I had some communist thinking, and I'm no, I'm not communist, but it was in the context that Donald Trump had some communist ideas. or something like that. And I think they weren't separating authoritarianism from communism. I think that was an issue there. But I was like, no, I don't think that way. I'm more very capitalistic. I'm very it's it's a strange dichotomy between those ideological things that you discuss them and you think you have a pretty good understanding. And historically, you do have a pretty good understanding, but as things are going on currently, you have to look at people and they like to label themselves, Democrats and Democrats and Republicans. You really don't the two-party system really doesn't cover a lot of
Right.
these
Nope.
folks, and you have to really kind of get to know all their policies to really understand like conservative or liberal or um, communist, Marxist, that sort of thing. You really kind of have to see what their policies are, and that's kind of what's upset at me over the last since really 2016. Nobody runs on policy anymore. They attack one another.
Right. Yep.
It really
You were
bothers
talking
me.
about uh, podcasts and conservatism. This is my 29th podcast this year. And I would say the vast majority of the podcast hosts that I've spoken with are conservative, or at least trying to uncover the truth, which is
Yeah,
the best solution of all.
and
Because
that's
they're
really the bottom line is truth.
right. But without podcasting, I mean, this is something that helps the right get get the word out. Since the media is controlled by the left, we just have to get people to, get off social media and pay attention to podcasts and learn more and stuff like that to get a better balanced view of the world.
Yeah, I that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast in particular. I've got a couple other projects that I'm working on, but news doesn't escape my little town here. And I say little town, it's a small city, population of 75,000 give or take, 40 square miles. So it's a pretty good size city.
Hmm.
But news doesn't escape here. We're close enough to Kansas City where Kansas City takes, any news that happens in the Kansas City area, that's what gets national attention. And we're also close enough to Kansas City that nobody cares about what happens here. So when big things happen here, it doesn't escape our little bubble. Like
Right.
nobody finds out about it until months or years later where it's too late to do anything about it. And that's one of the reasons why I was having difficulties in talking to people about some of the local things that were going on here because of tribalism, one side or the other, and I'm not taking anybody's side. I'm on my side. So
Yeah.
I just wanted a conversation. And I find that a lot of media doesn't escape here. And we have very conservative media here. One conservative newspaper bought up like three television outlets here. And so they control everything. They control all the media stories. And it's not 24/7 news. And so they do the news and then it's forgotten about. And the next day it's new news and it's forgotten about. And so that's a big part of the reason why I started this podcast. Another one is boredom, and I like people, like to talk to people. But just having a voice is very powerful because I feel like I don't have one anymore. I feel like it doesn't matter which way I vote. I don't. The power has left my hands. Um, Nobody that I really know of thinks like I do. They don't really think as deep as I do about why are we doing these things? Why are we doing those things? And I think on a fundamental level, it helps me to talk things through with different people.
Hmm.
And, and it's hard to describe to people like, okay, I may vote for Trump, but I don't really like Trump. I just think that he's the best man for the job at the moment. out of all our choices, we had three or four choices up until a couple months ago. Out of all our choices, he was really the one that fit the best
Hmm.
because of the things that are currently going on. And describing that to people and telling my friends and family, like, look, this is how I think I'm going to vote. Like, how do you feel? They would they wouldn't attack me with facts. They wouldn't attack me with um, anything important or a value. They would attack me personally and tell me that I'm thinking flawed or I'm wrong. And I'm like, no, I'm just different. I don't think of things like you. And in this election coming up, I think I'm thinking more of my kids
Hmm.
and me personally financially. I'm hurting financially, and I see the right as a possible solution to what I'm feeling, and because of how far left we actually went in the last 4 years, and I worry about the stability of the global system. I'm not really a globalist, but I'm not an anti-globalist either. So I do understand the global system that we have, and I'd like to kind of nurture that. And I don't think that's what's happening right now.
Right. Well, you talk about it, you're a fan of capitalism, and I say that I am too, from the standpoint of um, its value, because it brings the good to the top and the bad to the bottom, and it purifies. I mean, that line from what was the movie Wall Street, where if you've seen that. So, but it's a hard intersection with globalism, because globalism goes beyond the setting up trade rules for all the companies in the world. It has this sinister authoritarian element to it, where their goal is to get rid of the nation state. And the nation state is important because that's what people vote in. And if you take the nation state away and the world is run by NGOs, then no one has any recourse. You just accept what you live with, which doesn't sound good. So,
No, it doesn't. It sounds like a recipe for disaster, really.
yep,
I'm if I had to take a globalist approach to things, it would be more for trade
yeah,
and not really anything else. But in the current political system or current political climate that we have now, it seems like a lot of globalists like to use trade as weapons. You know,
yep,
we start a trade with country A, and then country B does something that country A doesn't like, but we like. We will take resources from country A to give to country B,
right,
and that doesn't make sense to me. I'm all for trade, but we can't use it as a weapon. That's how people don't trust us.
right,
And I think business should be business, and feelings should be feelings.
right.
But you can't weaponize people. You can't weaponize societies like that. We're
Yep,
all hungry, and like there's people on the other side of the world that are starving because someone said something that someone else didn't like, and I'm not all about that. I'm
yep,
I'm I like being able to take care of ourselves. I
yep,
like um, I don't I know that we won't be energy independent, but I like the thought of trying to be energy independent. Um, I like I like the thought of made in America, and that's what make America great again means to me,
yes,
is when we see American flags that are that say made in China. I think we got a problem. We can make that stuff here.
yeah,
We can absolutely make that stuff here. And but the only reason that we don't is because, you know, one day somebody said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's go over to country A and see if we can start some manufacturing there, we'll get things cheaper, and it became a mess. But I think of capitalism like competition. That's how I think of
Yeah.
capitalism. I think if this guy over here makes a good product and this guy over here, I can make that cheaper. I can also make it better. Well, I'm going to go to his competitor and buy.
Hmm.
And then that invites everybody else to start making it too. And I dig that. That's what capitalism means to me.
One of the problems with neoliberalism is it ignores the worker because its philosophy is you get workers as cheap as you can, you do your manufacturing there, which is really unfair. Um, so that's an example of an
But their
excess.
argument for that would be that they changed the way of life where manufacturing is happening.
Yeah, but they're still only paying the people are making $1 a day or something. Yes, they
But
did. It's
a
better than
dollar
it
a day
was.
in China, a
Right.
dollar a day in China might be different than a dollar a
Yep.
day here.
Yep.
That's their argument.
Right.
And whereas, I'm not all about, so my cell phone here, it takes conflict minerals to make this cell phone.
Yeah.
There's blood in this cell phone.
Yeah.
I never asked for that. I never wanted that.
Right.
Nobody asked me if that was okay before that they I didn't understand how that stuff was made. I didn't understand that there was conflict minerals in there. And when I found out, I had a cell phone that was like 3.5 years old. When I found that out, it was heartbreaking. It was like, what, I'm contributing to this by buying these things, and I never asked for that. And I think we can make that stuff here. The only reason we don't is because it's cheaper elsewhere.
Right.
And that doesn't equate to a cheaper phone. Like, it cost the company that made this phone 39 cents to get the most expensive minerals to put in this phone. And the cheap price that they got for those conflict minerals, that doesn't pass down to me. I still paid $1,200 for that phone.
Right.
And if I'm paying that much for the phone, we could make it here. Like, you're telling me we can't make a cell phone for less than $1,000 in this country? That's mind numbing. I don't believe them.
Right. Let me say
So
a couple let me say a couple of things about the new book only to because they're relevant to our discussion. So the billionaires are in control. Um, in the last chapter of the book, I sort of summarized the whole situation, and I wrote one section of the chapter, billionaire control is bad. But then I wrote another section called billionaire control is good. So I want to take a minute and explain that. If the goal of the billionaires is to enrich themselves and promote a stable society so their money is not threatened, there's some good in that because their stabilizing influence because they're in control means there's less that's out of control. So we have to appreciate, and I'm using that word in quotes, we have to appreciate that experience because, for example, it guarantees us freedom because we can basically live our lives the way we want in the cities we live in and raise our families and mow the lawn and all that stuff because there is no civil war going on, basically. The other benefit is um, that where the public's interests are aligned with the billionaires' interests, the public wins. Example of that is a healthy economy. So the billionaires want a healthy economy, and the rising tide lifts all boats. So that's a good thing. Um, so it's part good, part bad. Um, where it's going, I it's going toward global control. How we stop that, I don't know. We have to keep the nation state intact to be able to control who we elect.
Well,
basically.
I think if we want to stop that, we kind of have to look at why we want to stop that
Right.
and kind of try to dissect why that might not be a good idea. Well, countries most of the time, country governments have a hard enough time running themselves.
Hmm.
Could you imagine if we took 140 some, 120 some countries and made them
160
one?
or something, or it's a big number, 180. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Could you imagine if we made all of those countries into one system? It wouldn't be right. It would be disastrous, in my opinion. But I don't know. And I think I agree with you. I think there are certain people that are trying to get it to go that way. Will it ever happen? I don't think so. Not in my lifetime.
Well, I've been trying to decipher the ideology of the World Economic Forum because you read the report and you read the 2030 report, and it's noticeably vague about the details. And things slip out, like in the Netherlands, they're trying to get farmers to cut their crop, you know, not grow crops in one quarter of their farmland or get rid of one quarter of their animals and stuff like that. Uh, so that's sort of like sneak peeks. But um, I think right now, in my sixth book is about this. My sixth book is about the danger of global totalitarianism. But what I see right now is that they want to get the West on board because the West are the big capitalist countries and include the major corporations of the world. And then anybody that doesn't join up eventually just becomes a slave state
Yeah.
because they won't care. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. And I really like the way when you with your books, the way you did the progressive gene, then you did the conservative gene. You did tribalism, and then the antithesis of that, the twilight of the
yeah,
American experiment. And you know, America's counterfeit democracy, rule of the power elite. That's kind of a standalone kind of thing because that is very true. That the power elite control a lot more than people think they do. Like the lobbyists in Washington, there's a
yeah,
reason why they're there. It's because this company A wants this certain power or they want this certain legislation. So they'll go tell this lobbyist, hey, go offer this politician $1 million in donations, get him to say this. And then that's how that works. And then I can't remember who did the joke, but it may have been George Carlin or Robin Williams, maybe, that politicians should have to wear like racing jackets with all their endorsers
right,
on them
right.
so we can tell who owns them. And there's quite a bit of truth to that. A lot
So
more
that
than what people want to
the
think.
span of control of the billionaires over the federal government has three components: direct influence because they own or control major corporations; indirect because they have their power elite colleagues placed in the executive branch of the government. The attorney general, the secretary of treasury. These are elites who went to prep school, graduated from Ivy League University. They've been a consultant. They've worked in a high position in a major corporation. They may have been elected official or whatever. And now they're controlling the executive branch. The
That's
third,
interesting. I just thought of something as you were talking. It, the the institutions, the higher education institutions, the colleges, the universities, these places are run by, for the most part, liberals
yeah,
who are teaching liberals, who are then coming in and controlling the next wave of things.
yeah.
And that it kind of makes in my brain, it kind of makes it click, like that may be why education's such a big thing on job applications. Maybe they're trying everybody's trying to get that leftist point of view or that
Right.
liberal point of view. And that's a good way to do it, is to tell these jobs like, hey, if they're not educated, you don't want them to work there.
Right. Well, and
That's
if you have an Ivy League degree, you're gonna have a guaranteed career because they know you're a
yeah,
lefty. So you
yeah.
follow in with the ideology. The third span of control is controlling the media because the media uh, emits propaganda of two types. One type is trying to influence the people into doing something. I mean, accepting a political point of view or buying a product or whatever. But the other type is telling the American people that everything is all right here and they don't need to worry. So there's like this soothing, we got control of it, we're good, whatever propaganda that goes along with the influence peddling. And so that's, I mean, those are the three legs of the stool that allow the elites to exert the control they do.
Hmm. I do think I do think we're going to be okay though. I think no matter what happens at the end of the day, we're going to be okay with either political candidate that gets in. I think uh so with Joe Biden, and I don't think it was quite as apparent with Obama, but with Joe Biden specifically and Kamala Harris, I see the party running things. And Donald Trump, I don't think anybody can run him, but I I I see things that over the next 4 years, no matter who's president, we're going to be okay because things don't change overnight unless it's something huge like a civil war or something like that. Those things do break out kind of like overnight. But um, I think we're going to be okay. What is your prognosis on how America is doing now, and how you
You're an
see the future?
idealistic guy. I give you credit for that. I'm an idealist also, but a pragmatist. I don't know where this is going. I mean, I've just published an article on Substack today, and I'd be happy to give you a Substack subscription if
Absolutely.
you'd like.
What we'll do when we get off here, we'll if you want to hang out with me for a few minutes, I'll
Okay,
get your email, and I'll send you an email so that way you'll have
we
mine.
communicate. Yep.
Yeah,
Um, but the title of the article is we got to fix tribalism before we fix the government. And so that we're back to this whole thing about we need the 88% need to decide they're not going to be controlled by the 12%.
and I think that's happening.
We
I think
could,
it's slow, but I think it's happening.
yeah. Uh, we could do 2 or 3 hours podcasting about how the election system ought to be changed because it's a big part of the problem. The system's rigged for two parties. There's no limit to contributions, blah, blah, blah. The election cycle is too long, too much money spent. The billionaires are picking the two candidates, basically. I mean, it's ironic that they used to talk about until 1968, candidates were picked in what they call a smoke filled room where all the party bigwigs got together and said, um, Lyndon Johnson is our guy. And so
Yeah,
they
there's a
picked him.
good show on HBO called Succession. Have you seen
Yep.
Succession?
Yep.
Yeah, that lines it out pretty perfectly how it
Yep.
happens. And then when I was looking at that, like I kind of knew that's how it happened. I kind of knew that's how our leaders were picked.
Yep.
But as I'm watching that show, I'm like, well, these guys are talking about how stupid this other guy is, but they're going to elect him to be, leader of the free world. That kind of points out that the president really doesn't control anything.
Right.
They have that executive power, but, you know, they don't really control much. It's all a
Sure.
public face. And that was pretty wild to see. But yeah,
So, so
it's
in,
controlled
so,
by money.
so in 68, they started the primaries up with the idea, it was a progressive idea, but it's idealistic, figuring the people will pick the candidates. They'll have control because they'll pick the candidates, but they don't because the candidates in the primaries are placed and positioned. And so no matter how the people vote, it generally their guy wins. And so then you got their guy against their guy, one billionaire class against another. Let me give you a startling statistic. If you and I are running for office against each other, and I spend more money than you do, I have a 90% chance of being elected because most of the people are voting based on face familiarity. And if they see my face more than yours, I'll be elected. It has nothing to do with my programs, my beliefs, my background, my ethics, my morality. It's my face.
Yeah, and if it's starting out on the local level, if you scratch this guy over here's back, you're going to get elected again. And you might even say make governor of a state doing
Yep.
things like that.
Yeah.
And then if you play ball and work with other politicians at that point, your career could be anywhere
Higher.
it wants to go.
Yeah. Right.
And that is it's insane how it works because it used to be, a guy like me would go to work every day and then somebody would, I would feel that sense of public duty. I would run for office. I would do the job for X amount of years and then come out and go back to work. I wouldn't stay a politician.
Yep.
Career politicians, I think career politicians kind of ruin things for real, but how do you get out of that? Because nobody else knows how
Well,
to,
what you have to do, people complain about the age of our politicians. They're too old and they want term limits and stuff like that. They have the power to do it now. They just have to vote people out of office. But everybody says we got to throw the bums out, but they're never willing to throw their bum out. It's up to other people to throw their bum out, and then nobody does it. But the way you have to do it is you got to throw the bum out during the primaries. Because if there's a incumbent Democrat running against a rookie Democrat in a primary, and you vote in, you wait till the general election, that career Democrats now voting against a Republican, and you're asking people to abandon their party. So you have to do it when there's two Democrats running against each other. You got to dump the incumbent.
yeah. I've got one more thing I want to ask you about, and I'll let you get out of here. Um, we had kind of touched on this a little while ago. Uh, the Democratic Party does it a lot when you don't fly their program, they kick you out. And that
Yep.
happened with RFK Jr.
Yep.
and more recently with RFK Jr., but Tulsi Gabbard as well. What are your thoughts on the Trump administration picking them up?
Well, I think it's a good strategy because they both bring votes with them.
Do you think it
Uh,
was just strategy, or do you think there might be some
no,
other
I
reason
think
for it?
Trump, I mean, for all the abuse Trump takes, he is a loyal American that wants to do positive things. And he said it himself. And if you don't believe this, you're an idiot. He didn't have to run. He could have just said, screw it. I was president for 4 years. I'll just retire and relax. He didn't have to do it, but he believes he can make things better in his heart. And that's why he's running. And I think he clicked with RFK Jr. because he's against, making us eat poison and poor quality food himself. So he did, like a light bulb went off, I think. So I think it's a logical ideological thing because Robert F. Kennedy is sort of um, I don't want to use the word renegade, but he's like a populist for the quality of food and the quality of
Yeah.
medicine. So that kind of fits there together. I mean, I thought it was great because the other thing it does is it leverages his skill in a way that wouldn't be expressed if he were just blown out as a minority candidate. And I mean, you know how hard they tried to prevent him from succeeding. They
Yeah.
did lawsuits in every state that he uh,
Well, hell,
filed.
just the 4 years that he was president, during those 4 years, he spent three of it defending himself.
No, I'm talking about RFK.
Oh, RFK. Yes.
Every state he applied to run in, they filed lawsuits against him, questioning whether he had enough signatures, looking for
I think the right
loopholes and
does
every
that too, though. I,
who.
I think I think the right does that too, though. When they don't like a particular candidate, they make a reason why they to get them out as well.
Well, you're probably right because the right is equal to the task of doing idiotic things that protect their ideology, just like the left.
Yeah,
So
well,
I'm not
Hunter
disputing
Biden
that.
is actually a perfect example of that. I think the charges brought up on Hunter Biden are complete bullshit. That's just the way I feel. The gun charge, I forget what the actual charge was, but it was like he lied on an application for a gun and
Saying
said
that he
he,
was drug free when he wasn't.
yeah,
That was it.
right. I wouldn't be charged for something like that. If I was to go lie on an application on a gun, I wouldn't be charged for that. What that is for is in the event of a committed, say I was to go buy a gun and I checked that off and then I committed a crime. That would just be another charge that they could give me. That's what that's for. That's not just to charge random people. And I think the defense that, like Hunter Biden may not have understood that he was an addict. That's a pretty good defense, but I wouldn't be charged for something like that. And that's where I think the right does the same thing too. It was at that time, um, things were being thrown around it on both sides, and I didn't like any of it. So
I'm going to disagree with you mildly because I mean, there's no doubt that Hunter Biden is being or was prosecuted because he was Hunter Biden, but he still broke the law.
that's
And
true.
it's
That's
true
true.
that you would not be, that they wouldn't go after you. Just like these seven of the Trump trials, they wouldn't go after, well,
In my
inflating.
opinion, Trump was the 30 some felonies. That was all for being a good businessman.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, and then there's a case where he was prosecuted and fined for undervaluing his assets when in fact they talked to the bankers and they said, well, we didn't use his numbers. We used our numbers because we're not going to loan him money based on his numbers. So the whole thing, there was no victim.
Yeah. And,
So it
and
was
he paid back the money that he got anyway. So
right,
it's
right.
not,
And so he was prosecuted because of who he is. In that case, he didn't even commit a crime. He's different than Hunter Biden. But that's what they'll do to stop him. They'll do anything.
I agree. And when I see stuff like that, it makes me just want to vote for him.
Yeah.
I with uh with the whole Biden thing, there's there's quite a bit there. There's so much on the bone there that we could pick off for you know interference, the the stuff in Ukraine, China. There's a whole bunch
Yeah.
there. But they were attacking Trump while he was in office. And I've said it numerous times, even on this podcast, that if he spent less time defending himself, you'd be surprised what he could get done because he did a lot of stuff
Right.
while he was in office that nobody talks about. I don't hear a whole lot of good things, not even from his administration. Some of the things that they should be saying, they're not saying. Some of the things that they should be campaigning on, they're not. Um, and like the debate, did you watch the debate?
Yep. Yep.
That was a disaster because Kamala Harris came out and she knew exactly what to do. Piss him off and it'll ruin his entire night. And that's what she did. She came
And he
out,
fell
she
for it.
pissed him off.
Right.
Exactly.
But she
And
was helped along greatly by the moderators.
yes, yes, she was.
They
Wow.
fact checked him 11 times and not
And
her
didn't
zero.
fact didn't yeah, didn't fact check her at all. At
Yeah.
all. That was wild. That was so wild to see. I'm
CNN
glad a
published
lot of
a
people.
CNN published a report this morning that said they fact checked her and she had 21 lies.
Wow. And
Well,
see,
she did. Most
as
of what she
she's
said was a lie. She basically denied, like the whole thing about having allowing gender change for illegal aliens that are in jail.
yeah,
There on Twitter. There's an interview with her, live interview from 3 years ago or something, where she talks through the whole thing. I made sure that was done because I want those people to be protected. And the whole thing about full term babies thing. I mean, there's at least 6 cases where babies were born alive near term as a result of abortion and survived, and they just sat there and watched them die. I
yeah.
mean, so most of what she said was a lie because she has to avoid anything in her past that makes her look, I mean, too lefty or too dangerous.
I was wondering if many people were going to notice that, and that a lot of people noticed that the moderation was really, really one-sided. It makes me wonder if they're going to do it again if they go somewhere like Fox.
Well,
I would want,
they're not going to do the big three uh, TV networks because they're all too biased. I think he learned his lesson. He figured, give it to me with all both barrels, and I'll be able to take it just to show that even though it's biased, I can hold my own. But I don't know. I don't know if he wasn't in the mood. He wasn't prepped right. I mean, I blame him because he
yeah.
should know, but he should know better. He should have deflected. But she worked. I mean, they must have had a master psychologist training her
Oh
because
yeah, you've
to
seen it
say
in his face too. You saw his face change as soon as she did it, and I was like, "Oh, it's over."
like all the foreign leaders hate your guts. I mean, and that's a way to attack him personally because he'll feel like he has to defend himself. He should have said, "That's your opinion. Now you answer the question about why there's unlimited immigration."
Yeah,
He could have turned the table. He's going to have to do that the next time. There's going to be another debate.
I hope so. I hope he does. See, he did pretty good with the one on with the one with Biden. I thought he did pretty decent, but
Yeah,
again, it was with Biden,
right.
so it it wasn't
Well, he
that
let
difficult.
Biden hang himself, basically.
He
I mean,
did,
so
and that's what he should have done with Harris. That's
yeah,
absolutely what he should have done. There were so many things that he could have done differently, and it would have tripped her up just like she tripped him up. And I think if he was able to keep his cool and stick with the topics, stick with the things that matter, the things that he's campaigning on. If he just stick with that, I think he would have been fine. But
yeah,
I absolutely can't wait until November is here and gone
yeah,
because it's taken up too much of my time trying
right.
to keep everything straight. And I know with the two presidents or the two people running for president right now, um, like I said, I think either of them are going to be okay because we've had 4 years of Biden. We can tolerate 4 years of Kamala, and we've already had 4 years of Trump. I think we can do another 4 years. Um, but what I struggle with sometimes is the local politicians don't always get to campaign, and I don't hear them a whole lot. They don't there's no there's no debates with the local politicians. Maybe we need to do some of that stuff and get people thinking a lot differently on federal politics because like I was just thinking about it this morning, like a lot of the things that are federal right now, federal issues don't affect my daily life.
Right.
And we all need to think a little bit more like that. The things that do affect our daily life are more local. So, but Michael, this has been a great conversation. I've had a great time, and bit later, I'd like to have you on again after the November elections. You down with that?
Sure. Yep. I'm done with that.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Michael, it's been a great conversation. We'll talk to you again later.
Okay, appreciate it.
Bye.
Nice meeting you. Bye.